It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
A tie? All right, I guess. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulsen. I'm Craig Hoffman. Eric Bickle of the Sports Junkies predicted a 16-16 tie. It was the last of the Junks predictions on our Countdown to Kickoff show this morning. And we laughed at it because, like, who picks a tie? The correct person?
Don't do that.
By the way, I had a, nobody cares, but I had a 4-leg parlay that I missed by one Saquon Barkley receiving yard, and the Commanders actually pulling that out. But I felt so good throughout so much of that. I was getting the things I needed. The game was unfolding the way I thought, and then it ended in a tie. And Logan, here's the thing. For me, emotionally speaking, in the moments after this game has concluded, it feels appropriate. It feels like those were two teams that played well. Maybe I'm just that deep emotionally into the World Cup and like I've accepted draws and ties as a part of my being. But maybe two teams that played pretty well each had their moments within the game that are actually fairly evenly matched when you take some of the strengths of one and the weaknesses of the other. And ultimately, it feels kind of right, as wrong as ties feel in the NFL.
Yeah, and I do feel like if this was not Washington's best game by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't feel like they deserve to win. They probably should have lost this game. And so the fact that they were able to kind of galvanize and show that resolve late in the game to come out with a tie, I thought was outstanding. You know, those completions to Curtis Samuel, the touchdown to Jahan to tie it up, I thought showed a lot of character. You know, they had a whole bunch of holding calls, like weird special teams penalties, two kind of disastrous special teams penalties that should have completely reshaped the outcome of the game, but they were able to overcome those. Great job by the defense, kind of stepping up at key moments in the fourth quarter. And, you know, like that, I think that's where I fell on it. I think that if you look at the third quarter, you say, man, this team should lose this game. And then they kind of righted the ship and did an excellent job, which kudos to them. Kudos to that team and kudos to their composure. Obviously, a tie is not ideal, but I kind of am with you. Like, it went from they shouldn't win this game to fighting, clawing, scratching, getting back into the game, showing some of the weapons they have from an offensive standpoint. I still think Taylor, puts the ball in harm's way too much. Like, there was a couple on that last little drive where it's like, oh my gosh, you know, it could have swung this way or could have swung that way, and it could have easily been an interception, which tough deal. But it didn't, and they were able to come out with a tie.
Right. But at the same time, Taylor, 27 of 41, 275, 2 touchdowns, no picks. He also takes 5 sacks. And on all of them, I don't think you look at it and go, like, oh, he really messed up there. Maybe as we break down the tape later in the week, you might say a protection situation. But, like, if Carson's in that game, not to make it a Carson-Taylor referendum, but, like, that's another 9-sack kind of game. And so there's just stuff Heinicke does that keeps you alive, even though sometimes when he keeps it alive, he then puts the ball in harm's way. But, you know, you say they don't deserve to win, you know, and you look at some of the statistics offensively. Robinson, 21 for 96. That's a winning formula. He averaged 4.6 a carry. Gibson, another 9 for 39, averaged 4.3. Samuel, 3 carries for 23, averages 7.7, although most of that comes on the 21-yarder. But they target Terry 12 times. He's got 8 for 105 in the touchdown. Dotson finds the end zone. Samuel gets 7 targets. Like, they had an offensive game plan that worked. And in fact, like, my biggest frustration for them offensively was that last screen they called on the third down to Curtis. I think it was in overtime on that possession, or was that the last possession of regulation? I think it was overtime. Yeah. And I'm just like, you've gotten the man coverage that you wanted all day. Just run a pass pattern that allows someone to win. Jahan or Curtis, pick one.
I think you're more worried about the pressure there in that situation.
Sure, but like I trust Taylor there. They've won quickly. They don't run screens well. Part of the reason the screens are even in is because Cosme's in this week at guard, and he leaves with an ankle injury in the second half.
I will say look better with him in there, though.
Yeah,
the first
for
two
sure.
That they ran look good. But he's out for that screen, so your point is still...
So it's just like, man, they had some of that stuff, but all in all, I think, you know, a good offensive game plan that should have netted you a couple more points. Joey Sly misses one that's within his range. If that's the case, it's a 23-20 game, perhaps. And, you know, you never know how the end goes. But you do enough to win. Defensively, it's a weird game, man. Yeah. Daniel Jones going into the final drive for the Giants in regulation, which is one of the all-time boneheaded play calling drives I've ever seen in the NFL, has one incompletion on the day, and it is a spike to stop the clock at the end of the first half. He then throws 3 straight incompletions, which is the only way the Commanders can get in position to win the game in regulation, is if you go 3 and out on 3 incompletions where they don't use any timeouts. And that's exactly what they did, trying to take it all at once, which was wild decision-making by the Giants coaching staff. Danny Johnson has a couple of nice pass breakups in there. They get the ball back and ultimately can't do anything with it. They can't do anything with their one drive in overtime. But it's just a weird game defensively. And the last thing I'll say is offensively, obviously the penalties matter a ton. But defensively, but by the same token, they held him to 200 yards on the day. But he completed quite literally almost every pass that he threw. And so it's a weird game.
Different. Yeah, it felt really different. And I think, so kudos to Dable and the offensive coordinator for the Giants. I think they did, Kafka, I think they did a really nice job finding a wrinkle. We talked about what the wrinkle was going to be. And, against the Dallas Cowboys, it was this keeper game where they're booting out of the pocket. And I thought, well, how do they get to that? Because obviously the solution is just kind of run right at the quarterback and force the ball out of his hands. And what they did, I thought was really brilliant, is they said, well, we're going to just motion a tight end and then basically down block the defensive end, ensuring the edge for the quarterback. Quarterback's on the edge. He's getting the ball out of his hand quickly. You're not stressing the interior offensive line of the New York Giants offensive line, which struggled tremendously against Payne and Allen, kind of anytime it was a drop back passing situation. So good job by them. And then also you allow Jones to run the football from that standpoint. So I just thought that was a really nice wrinkle by them, and we knew it was coming. And so to see it unfold that way, I thought was really interesting. And, Washington really didn't have a good response for that. I mean, they were doing that on like 2nd and 12, 3rd and 10. Like that was the play that they were going to. So, kudos to them. And I think that was really cool to see that like football chess match kind of unfolding in real time. And I also thought, they did a good job. The defense generally kind of just staying with it, sticking with it. Casey Toohill, some of the defensive ends kind of figured out what the game plan was. And you could see they were playing that tight 6, which is a tough spot to play that technique from. And they're beating the guys outside. James Smith-Williams gets a holding call, right? Montez is kind of rushing really vertical up the field, forcing him to bow back, allowing the linebackers to match the concept. So to see that kind of in-game adjustment by the players, maybe they're talking about that on the sideline. It was just cool to see that. And then when a game of inches like that, it was a big deal. I will say, like you said, I think B-Rob, excellent job. Jahan, Terry, Taylor, I think just got to be a little bit more fastidious with the football. But overall, I think it's the penalties that absolutely smoke you and the pass protection, which is something, again, you and I talked about. We said, what is your protection plan? They had one, but again, like Taylor gets you out of a couple, and some of those are just free runners to the quarterback, and that's what Wink does to you. And they're playing this team again in a couple of weeks, so they need to clean that up a little bit if they're going to get that to win this football game.
So how would you describe, like you say, there was a plan, you can see it, most of us can't, based off of your expertise. What was the protection plan, and what did they do poorly in it?
So I think there's 2 ways to go with any kind of protection plan, and one is to get an empty or spread them out and say, match us up, we'll know who's coming, and we'll get the ball out of our hands quick, which is what I thought they were going to do. But on a couple of third downs, I think 2 specifically, they leave tight ends in and they leave the backs in, which is fine. That's a very viable pass protection philosophy. However, when you do that, like a tight end is a fine pass protector, but they're not an excellent pass protector. And in third down situations, you don't want John Bates blocking Kayvon Thibodeau or Logan Thomas blocking Azeez Ojulari. That's not good. Don't do that.
I think at this point, those of us who have the slow motion replays ingrained in our head now know what was wrong with the plan.
Right. And so, again, if you're going to keep them in, you want your big guys on big guys. You want your offensive linemen blocking defensive ends, and then your tight ends and backs kind of as auxiliary pieces to that. And this is the same. They kind of trotted out a very similar plan to what they did against Detroit. And there are similar holes. And this is part of the problem of going max protection with tight ends and backs is they're good at pass protection, but they're not great. So I would say, and they did versions of both. So I think Scott thought it out. The other thing I think Wink did, which was really good, is he knew that the Commanders squeeze into an internal blitz out of empty. So like if you're getting like let's say you have 4 down linemen and you bring the Sam and the Will, the offensive line squeezes it and they leave the defensive end for the quarterback. And I thought Wink did a nice job of scheming simulated pressures up that simulated that look where the offensive line would have to squeeze and then not actually bringing those guys and getting free runners off the edge. I think there was almost a safety at the end of regulation or an overtime where Taylor
it was in overtime.
The 2-yard line. Again, simulated pressure, squeeze down, Kayvon Thibodeau untouched off the edge. Same thing with Azeez Ojulari early in the game. So there's 4 pressure/sacks right there of just Wink kind of being one step ahead of the game in terms of protection and also understanding where the weak spots are and getting good matchups. So,
yeah, and that kills you because you have opportunities. I mean, this is Heinicke's highest yardage game in forever. We kind of
a little bit of that 2-minute drive you always like to talk about.
Well, there's a couple of things I think that happened here. One, we were joking before the game that it felt like I think the over under that BetMGM had it was like 207, something like that. And I was like, man, considering what Heinicke's done in the past couple of weeks, that feels high. That feels tremendously out of reach. He in the last, let's see if I get the game log up real quick. He has not broken 200 yards since Philly, and he's done it. And then he had 149 against Minnesota. This is his highest yardage total since the win over Indianapolis, which he also had a 2-minute drive late in. And that's what happens when you get these 2-minute drives late in games, such as the game-tying drive that he finishes off with the touchdown to Jahan. You can actually pad your stats a little bit, not in a way that's like meaningless. It's not stat padding, I guess, in that way. But the stats are going to look better because he had to go out there and earn it, and he did. He got really screwed by, and he and they offensively got really screwed by those sacks that you talked about, specifically in overtime. That is although I guess they overcame that one to get out of that hole a little bit, but then I think that's when they eventually got to the screenplay that I hated. I think
that was the last, if I remember correctly, that was the last drive that they had where they punted it back to New York. The sack before that was a different.
So they go sack on first down by Thibodeau. Giants call timeout at 1:28. Robinson gets the nice carry. That's a nice call by Scott because Thibodeau, who's a rookie, comes flying off the edge again, like, oh, I'm going to get him.
Yeah.
Back at the 10-yard line, and that is that's a nice little gain there. It was kind of like a draw play, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Gibson rushes for 5 yards on 3rd and 10. They just kind of at that point punt the game away.
Yeah.
In a very literal sense instead of going for it on 3rd and 10. I guess it was the other drive in overtime.
Yeah, it was the drive before. Yeah.
Yeah, the other drive in overtime. Yeah. It has the screenplay that I hate just because it's not something you do well. And you've had, what I was going to say though, is you have all these opportunities in man-to-man coverage where you have Dotson winning. Dotson, the most involved he's been in a long time. Samuel has a bunch of monster catches. Terry gave Fabian Moreau absolute fits all day long. And you just don't have the opportunity to take advantage because the pressure is so intense. And that's what Martindale is doing on purpose. It is a good job by him. It's a high risk thing. I mean, Commanders in this game run 82 plays. They have 41 minutes time of possession, which obviously is enhanced a little bit by when they keep the ball in overtime, but they were already above their league leading average by like mid 4th quarter. I think before they had their game tying drive, they had already, accumulated almost 35 minutes time of possession. So, the Commanders kind of did what they want to do. They've just got to, if Sly gets the field goal and they can convert one other drive, that's a 30-point performance. But you can say that a lot of weeks. That's kind of the thing with the NFL is you're always 1 or 2 plays away from having a monster day. But at the end of the day, the Giants were able to make just enough to keep them, keep the distance and then ultimately pass them. And then, Commanders tie it up and that's where it stays.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, do you have the game log in front of you by any chance?
I do. What are you looking for?
The penalties I felt like were huge, and there was a holding, there was a false start, 2 by Logan Thomas, and there was another kind of weird penalty. And this has just not been who this team has
seven
been.
for 56.
Yeah, and this is, I feel like, a very high total. I mean, it felt like when you were watching it, like, God, this is a little higher than it should be.
They came at really bad spots, and some of them were weird. Like the one on Thomas,
Yeah.
when he's like running to the left, that one was weird. Like he didn't do any, like unless they just didn't rewind to the right part of the replay. Like,
So yeah, when you watch,
weird.
so like I will say that the action of the defender there, he kind of like dives under to try to make the play. That is a, when I was watching it, I was like, oh, he just thinks he pushed him on the back, because that's like on special teams or any opportunity, like that's how that looks. I don't think he actually touched him, but I'm sure he was like blocked directly behind Logan, so it looks like he's pushing him down, but it doesn't actually happen. And that's one of those things where we get a different angle as a viewer than the referee gets on the sideline. So
yeah. But they came in big spots, and those were pretty killer.
Is this a high penalty total for them? Is there any way?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I can let me pull up the Pro Football Reference game log real quick. This is how you know it's an instant reaction podcast. We're doing this stuff on the fly. Let's see if I can get a Commanders game log for 2022. Now we're singing on the podcast, which is great. But I mean, generally speaking, they've been really clean, and they've been able to force other teams into penalties, and that's just something that they did a little bit today with Allen and Payne, forcing some of the holds and stuff inside, but they have not been able to I
will say the other thing that was big in this game that has been a very positive net asset for this team was the special teams. Obviously, there's the muffed kickoff return by Antonio Gibson, right? Which is pretty bad, and then that gives them bad field position. Then there's the catching the football inside the 5 by
Erickson,
yes, and he has a nice return there, but then there's a false start and a holding call by the same player that backs him up inside the 5. So basically two drives are like washes there in a game where you're intentionally shortening the game. Like, those are really, really big deals. And then you miss a field goal. So obviously, to me, like I wrote a note, I was like, special teams in the second half was not it. Penalties was a big deal. And then the protection just seemed to kind of not wither, but like that was a big issue in terms of game plan by Wink Martindale, and then the game plan by Scott, and how they kind of meshed. And so obviously, like, it's not a perfect world, you know what I mean, in terms of you're never going to have the right answer all the time. But it was something that I was like, man, this is something that's hindering this offensive performance pretty significantly at the moment.
Yeah, I cannot find the penalties.
Don't worry about
it in terms of the game log, but that definitely is more than they have been having recently. So offense, productive, but ultimately could have had a little bit more with a better pass protection plan. Defense ultimately felt kind of productive, except for a couple of bursts. And obviously it's kind of what we talked about. I think you really nailed it with Jones. Like, he just makes plays that keeps drives alive, and he had 5-6 rushing first downs on the day. And then special teams was a net negative today for the first time in a long time, and that's how you wind up losing this game. And now you're in a kind of a funky playoff spot, but ultimately you come back, you beat the Giants at home. You're still in good shape moving forward. You probably have to win an extra game now than where you would have been if you won this one. But a tie is significantly better than a loss.
Right.
And now the question is, what can this team be coming out of the bye? Something that we'll obviously spend a lot of time on over the next couple of weeks, is we won't have a game to talk about coming off of next weekend. Anything else from this game that you wanted to get to? Otherwise, short, sweet, and that's our tie game pod.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else defensively. Christian Holmes getting benched for Danny Johnson. I know you mentioned that briefly. I thought that was a pretty solid move by the staff, because Danny Johnson came out and did an excellent job and made some big plays down the stretch. Specifically in that drive you were kind of criticizing by the Giants, where they're throwing the ball a ton. Like, Danny Johnson is in there just making plays, and that's great to see. I thought, just real quick, like Ridgeway, like after kind of a rough week last week and then like a rough opening series, came out and kind of said, okay, like, let's stop the bleeding here. Did a nice job. Allen Payne, excellent. Casey Toole and F.A. Obata deserve a lot of credit because I think
Yeah.
Montez was banged up or wasn't
Yeah,
playing
he
as
was
much.
getting checked for a concussion, so we'll have to obviously monitor that. Obviously, by the time most folks are listening to this, there's probably an update. I'll check the beat reporters' Twitters real quick and see if I
Yeah,
can find
but
something.
obviously, like it's a good week if he does have one. It's a good week for him to get it if ever a good time because he'll have plenty of time to kind of rest and recover and get right. But those guys did a good job. I thought Jamin did some good stuff. Like he's just for a guy who was people thought couldn't play middle linebacker. I think is just settled in a really nice way and is calling the defense. Cam Curl did an excellent job tackling today. So like there was some spots like obviously the touchdown drive. The quick change after the turnover where you're like, man, maybe they could do a little bit better. But I thought they showed up and made some plays in pivotal moments of the game, getting a turnover again for however many weeks in a row. So I just wanted to give them a shout out. And, it would have been nice if they could have been more effective in certain situations. But I think overall you say, man, that's a pretty solid performance by them.
Yeah. The other thing that I think might get a little bit of attention is and I don't see any update other than Tyler Larson injury-wise, crutches for him. So that's something where if Cosme can come back, they can kick Schweitzer into center. But otherwise, you're looking at Nick Martin, that looks probably for a while. But the penalties today, some of them were questionable and also some definite missed calls early in that first half, or in the first half, I should say. There was the missed pass interference where Terry got held. They threw the flag, then picked it up. That was probably PI. There's a jersey grab there. It's not an egregious one.
Right,
Christian Holmes definitely has a case for OPI on the big play to Slayton on their first touchdown drive.
Yeah,
gets discarded. Right. But he's a rookie. He's not getting that call, man. Like you got to fight harder. You got to make it obvious. A little tug of the hip. That's good stuff from Slayton to discard a player who's like trying to box you out. I know obviously the Giants wanted pass interference on Danny Johnson. That was a good no call in my opinion. Late on that drive we were just talking about. But it's the kind of thing where like both sides wanted calls. It evens out in the end, and it's interesting to scroll through Twitter real quick and see a bunch of fans complaining about calls, and it's like it's not really why this game was tight. Did stuff get missed? Yes. Was it horrendously egregious? No. And it wasn't so absurd of an amount that it changed the game one way or the other.
And also on the one with Terry specifically, like on that, if that ball's better, and if Terry's fighting for that a little bit more like dramatically, he gets the call. But it just
you got to watch more soccer, bro. Yeah. We got ties now. Now we got to learn how to earn calls. That's what I'm saying. That's what it took out of this game.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying though, right?
More soccer.
Like that ball, like if that ball is a little up and more on the angle where Terry's going, they're for sure calling that. But
right, and Ron is trying to explain like, well, he can't get back to the ball because he's being held. But you know, it's also a tough ball to get to no matter what. Thanks to the throw.
Yeah, and I would say if I'm the receivers coach, I turn to Terry and I'm like, hey, just make that more demonstrative, like push through him to get to the ball. And I've heard coaches make that same levy that same feedback, to other like Pierre and stuff like that. So that's what I would say to him. And, for fans to say, oh, that's a missed call. Like, come on, you know what I mean? Like that's not the reason you win or lose the game. I know that would have been points there, but I think it's probably not the best call of all time, but I've seen worse misses.
Yeah. It's not egregious. Last thing I said right before we started recording this that I would mention this. It's a nit, but I'm going to pick it. It is a 58-yard field goal attempt at the end of overtime in MetLife Stadium. The longest field goal in the Giants' history is 57 yards. I know Graham Gano has a huge leg, but you are not losing anything by putting Jahan Dotson or Curtis Samuel or Antonio Gibson back on the end line and trying to run that back. And it winds up being short, and it would have been a tough catch. Okay, who cares? It's an untimed down, essentially, and unless you somehow fumble the ball and get it returned for a touchdown, which the chances of that are probably less than your guy actually returning it all the way for a touchdown on a missed field goal. There's no reason not to have someone back there. Do I, honest to God, think that if Gibson had been back there and caught it, he would have run 109 yards for a touchdown? No, of course not, because the chances of that are slim to none. But slim is better than none, and it's the kind of like little thing that just annoys me that it seems like this team does not do right on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I know you're like nitpicking there, but I actually wouldn't have hated that. Just to give it a shot.
It's the right call. Like,
Yeah.
again, like it's not the most important thing. There's a million other more important things, which is why it's the last thing I'm mentioning on the way out. But it's like the kind of thing that you're like, you want to be good in situations. So be better in situations. Give yourself the best chance as often as possible because you just don't know.
And if I'm going to play devil's advocate, I guess you could say that you don't want to return the ball there because you don't think your guy can get it back to wherever the 40, whatever the math is.
But there's no time left.
Oh, it wasn't zeroed, was it?
Yeah. Oh no, it was 0-0.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's how the game ended.
Yeah, I got you.
So
I thought it was
Taylor was
like
holding
5
one. He's like, is there 1 second left?
Yeah.
But no, there was zeros on the clock. The kick from 58 was the last play of the game.
Yeah.
No reason.
That would have been interesting for sure. Also, I know this is my last thing. How sick was Jahan's touchdown? Holy cow!
By the way, the last punt in overtime. Why is he not returning it? I know Erickson's got some experience and a little more explosiveness than Dax did. And you're not trying to botch something inside the 5 there. Yeah. But again, it's like, do you want to play to win or do you? And maybe Ron was like, hey, I think we're actually just going to play to tie today. We're on the road. Yeah. We've dodged a few bullets. Like maybe he's playing a tie. And if that's the case, fine. But they keep saying, oh, well, in case of emergency, Jahan's there. What's the emergency?
Right.
Is it only if you're down where, oh, well, if we lose, we're already losing it? Like, just do it. Go.
Yeah.
Go forth and prosper with your best players.
I was going to ask you, are you surprised they didn't attempt that field goal at the end of overtime there? They were like right near the line to gain or the line for the field goal. I think they were maybe 5 yards, 3 yards short of it, at least the one that was on the TV. And I was like,
you're talking about the first one that the Giants had when they punted on 4th and 3?
No, I'm talking about the one that the Commanders had after the Curtis Samuel long run.
Let's see. They said in overtime on the Samuel long run. They had a 4th down at the Giant 43.
Oh, yeah, that's too far.
Yeah, so that's 7. That's 60.
Yeah, nah.
Yeah, I think with 4:11 to go in overtime.
I thought they were closer.
I think with 4:11 to go in overtime, you punt that one.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's in a different stadium. In a different stadium.
I agree. I think
so.
I thought they were a little closer than that. I thought they were like in that 58 kind of range. But yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, 60s.
Especially with him missing one earlier, I don't think I'd feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. But those are the kind of decisions that coaches got to make all the time. So there's that. All right. We will be back with a much more comprehensive breakdown on Wednesday. That is our film breakdown day. And then we'll probably do a mailbag on Friday. Got some ideas I want to throw at you and Matt for some things that we can do for Friday's pod. Obviously, we got to figure out what we're doing next Monday and Wednesday as well before we preview the Giants again the Friday after. So we will still be publishing on schedule. Exactly what we do, I think, is a little bit up for debate, but we'll figure it out, and that's why you subscribe, because no matter what it is, we promise you it'll be good. So subscribe anywhere you're listening or watching right now, and we will see you on Wednesday here on Take Command. Thanks for checking out this clip of Take Command. Or maybe it wasn't a clip. Maybe it was the whole thing. You can always get the whole thing. Let's change the graphic. Ready? Boom. Producing on the fly. Bang. Wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, right here on YouTube. You can also check us out not only at youtube.com/@CraigHoffman, but Logan, the Odyssey Sports page is live soon. That's very exciting.
That'll be fun. I don't care where you subscribe, as long as you do subscribe to one of these platforms. That would be very helpful for us.
Yeah, do it. Or Logan's going to come to your house, and he's going to be a sift blocker and knock you over.
Yeah, cut the legs out from under you, right?
We can't even do that on the field, but we can do it in real life.